Here we go. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Scott French. I'm the Director of Public History here at UCF in the History Department. And I'd like to welcome you all to this book talk and public history career workshop. Our speaker is making his way here right now. Like a rock star, he's entering, with great fanfare and his roadies, but he will be here any minute. I just received the call. So we've been chatting a little bit about public history here at UCF. We have a lot of faculty in our department specialized in different kinds of public-facing history. Really, there are very few historians working today who aren't engaged in some kind of public history. Used to be sort of seen as something very different from academic history. There's the ivory tower history, and then there's history that people do out in the public. Now it's almost, it would be, I think, odd if someone didn't participate in some kind of public-facing history as a scholar. It's really important that we get out in the public and explain what we're doing and why it matters, right? Even if it's something that we're studying as way back, it may have relevance to us today. It will have relevance to us today. And we're often called upon by the press to help explain events in the news. In fact, in my classes, I do start every class with something called History in the Now. And it's trying to bring the past into the present and show how some of the events that are surrounding us and happening right now have their roots in history. They all have their roots in history, I should say. But we are uniquely called upon as historians to help contextualize current events. And I think the other important thing to say is that that history, we should think broadly about what that means and the topics that we cover as historians. I think, there's sort of, there's of course politics and law and society and great movements in history. There's also popular culture. And I think today's speaker is going to really emphasize to us why it matters that we consider popular culture. Why is a book about Duane Allman, a rock star, who died very young, left an incredible legacy of influential music. Why is that a subject worthy of historical research? And I think one of the things that I was impressed with is that he published his book with the University of Florida Press. That's an academic press. And so, this was recognized by them as a book worthy of being published by them. And I'm going to ask Dr. Beatty, who's probably running up the stairs right now, why he chose to publish with an academic press. He has a lot of Florida connections. And so I think that academic presses are diverse too. They no longer simply, publish the books that are written in high theory. They publish a wide range of books, and history itself is transforming. If you pick up the latest issue of the American Historical Review, Dr. Lester, who's in the back of the room, it's this thick, and you say, oh, that must be, incredibly dry and boring. And it's not. They have a whole section in there about how history is being done, right? How scholars are understanding history through performance, through digital history. And it's just mind-blowing how different academic history looks today than it did even 10 years ago. Dr. Beatty is trained as an academic historian. He got his Ph.D. at Middle Tennessee State University. And so he has the credentials that one would expect of an academic historian. But when you talk to him, his career path really took him into other realms. He does teach at academic universities. At universities, he teaches as an adjunct. He mentioned that he teaches at Rutgers. He teaches in the Johns Hopkins Museum's online Johns Hopkins Museum Studies program, which I'd like to ask him about. But he also has a consulting group, the Lyndhurst Consulting Group. So he's created a company. And he'll talk about that. He's right here. I've set him up. See, this is all a setup.
Wait, does David hear you? No.
So, I've been introducing you.
Should I go put my coat on? Where's my
No, because it'll obscure your.
Okay.
Allman t-shirt. You're perfectly appropriately dressed for this. So you missed your introduction, but I think you already know yourself.
I do.
As well as you're going to know yourself.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Are you all students? Everybody here except Dr. Lester, a student? Awesome.
Great. Well,
Catch my breath. I walked up the stairs.
yes, I said you were running up the stairs.
I was.
I only walked.
The old Coburn Hall had 5 flights, so this was a little easier.
And
Nice shirt.
Actually, on the back
Nice
of the book here, there is Mike Madison, vocalist of
Tedeschi Trucks Band.
Tedeschi Trucks Band.
Awesome.
So there you go. We talked about this beforehand, that you would prefer, I'm going to step back on camera here, that you would prefer to have a conversation, but what I would like to do is sort of start and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Sure.
I already covered some of your academic background, some of the work you're doing, and I'm going to ask you questions, but if there's any sort of opening remarks you'd like to make.
Sure.
And then I'm going to ask you a few questions.
So thank you. My apologies for being late. I just finished talking to Sebastian on a podcast that we were having such a good time. We could have continued going. And then he goes, "Oh, you got to go." And I was like, "Oh, what time?" "Oh, it's time to start my presentation across campus." So forgive me, because I'll say this to y'all as students, your time is very valuable. And, the expectations on the presenters, your faculty and stuff is but we should be honoring and respecting that too. So I apologize to each of y'all for that. For running over time. I am a graduate of this university twice. I got my, did you do that part?
I did, but
Twice night. So I have my bachelor's degree is actually in liberal studies, AKA college. I came here for 5 years. It took me 5 years and I got a degree, which was basically cobbled together. I started as a history major. And when I was 94, my now wife and I moved back to Orlando in 1990. We moved away for about a year. So in 95, we moved here and she started in the graduate program as a counselor, mental health counselor. Pretty useful field even today, much more so really even than ever before, right? So she started grad school, and about a year later, I started grad school too. And it was mainly, I went back to get my degree in history. And I remember my older sister at the time said, "What are you going to do with a master's degree in history?" And I was like, "I don't know." And if anybody wants to laugh at that, you can, because honestly, I think that's a question a lot of us ask, especially if you have no real desire to go into academia as a discipline. I didn't want to become a professor at a university, mainly because I just didn't feel qualified to go through that effort. There was a point to me where folks like Dr. French and Dr. Lester were just beyond my capability of achieving anything. And I knew that if I shot for that, I didn't know it at the time, but I just didn't feel qualified for it. My undergrad training was, I don't know. I didn't really care that much about school when I was in undergrad. I was here to have a good time, to meet people, and to party as much as I could possibly do in the time I was here. So I started my master's here at UCF. It was and remains a master's terminal program, meaning there's nowhere to go, right, when you're done. Are we up to 40 minutes?
No.
Oh, no. Okay. I know you're late. That offered, so I started my master's degree, and basically my whole idea was I just wanted to learn more history. That was my thing. Now I want to just point out and dissuade you of any notion, if you're in history graduate school, that you're really going to learn history, hard history, or anything like that. For the most part, I had to learn that graduate school in history was the process of constructing history, of doing history, of how books like mine come to be, or how books like a textbook, the survey textbooks or whatever. And in the meantime, I got a job at the History Center, what is now the History Center in downtown Orlando. This program was not a public history program. I had never heard the term public history until Rose, Dr. Byler, and whoever started working on creating this public history program here. By that point, I was done or finishing. I don't know when it officially launched. Do y'all know? Do you know? Like, is it
It was already going when I got here.
early
Dr. Lester,
2000s?
do you know?
They were working like when I came,
What year did you come?
2005.
Okay, so it must have just launched about that time, and that's because I left in 2007. So I started my master's program here. I did not know what I was going to do. All I wanted to do was study history, and it was a weird environment. And so any of y'all who are thinking about grad school, if you've already been in grad school, I just want to tell you, most of the people sitting in that room have no idea what they're talking about, just like you. That's the way it goes. Even though you walk in a room and you feel like, geez, I don't know. Maybe y'all don't feel this way, but I know I felt really stupid for a long time in that classroom because I didn't want to say some dumb things as much as some other people had said. I'm certain I said a ton of dumb shit over the years. I mean, that's just kind of what happens. But I was working at a local history museum as I finalized my degree. So the History Center downtown, if you've been, I was the founding curator of education, and the curator title means a lot more outside of the museum world than it does in the museum world. In the museum world, the curator title is a real basic level. In the museum world, you want to be a director of a department, or you want to be an associate director or something. You want to get above that. But I was curator of education. I was really the director. And I ran everything there that had to do with engagement with history beyond just looking at the exhibitions, basically. All the programs, all of that. It was a wonderful job because we were brand new. And we were given a lot of leeway to really do some good stuff, you know? And so probably the best thing I did, 2004, I did a Brown v. Board of Education 50th anniversary thing. So Brown, I don't need to explain to historians, but you know, the decision to outlaw segregation just in education. That's essentially what the decision came down. And we did for the 50th anniversary in this community in partnership with the history department, and Linda Chapin was working at the time at the Center for Metropolitan Studies. We planned a whole series of programs throughout the community. Probably one of the more unique things I've ever done in my life, looking back on it. My wife was also pregnant at the time with our second daughter, and we were having some complications, so I missed almost all of it. Like I only went to a couple of things, but the thing that hit me the most, on my birthday, my 33rd birthday, February 19th, we brought Fred Shuttlesworth in from, at that point, he was in Cincinnati, but he led the Birmingham movement, the Alabama civil rights movement, for much of its existence. He was not in Birmingham as a pastor in the summer of '63 when the fire hoses came out, those famous images, but he influenced that greatly. He came, it's gotta be one of the most amazing things in my life. So I learned, I guess, to get back on topic, I learned to do public history both here as well as working at the History Center. And I left mainly because I had no job opportunity. So here's a problem that is probably not going to be a bigger problem for y'all as it was for my generation. I'm Gen X, which is a very small generation between two very large generations of people, the baby boomers at one end, and then I guess you call millennials, and then the Zoomers on the other end, right? So there weren't a lot of jobs. A lot of people stayed in jobs for a long time. They got jobs when they were young, director jobs and stuff. So I left to go to the American Association for State and Local History. Am I good? Is everybody staying with me at this point? Because I'm just babbling at this point.
No, this is good.
It's continuing my babbling from earlier. So I joined this organization. They're a national organization based in Tennessee. And they work with museums, historical societies, historic sites, and the people who work in them. Hey, that's a killer shirt, dude. Nice, thank you. Ava's repping the team. I like, that's my goddaughter and my niece Ava, and I didn't mean to call her in, but now I see her shirt. I had to acknowledge it. Sorry. I went to ASLH. We were the National Association for State and Local History, and professional historical practice and my training as a historian here really informed that job so much. I worked with about 8 people. We covered the country. I did a number of conferences. I mean, I brought speakers in from, Bernice Johnson Reagan from Sweet Honey in the Rock, who was a civil rights era. She was a civil rights veteran. I had President Bill Clinton at a conference one time. And sort of everybody in between. It was just this great job. I edited a magazine when I was there. I edited our book series. Actually wrote 2 books while I was working for them. Actually 1.5. The other book I wrote on my own time. Now I think about it. Along that term, 2007 was 2012 when I made the decision to go back and get my Ph.D. And my decision was, and I went to my advisor, I wanted to do a book on the Allman brothers. I had already done a thesis on museums and community. I'm extremely proud of it. You can go check it out at the library. It's got more checkouts than Jill Garrity. You know Jill. We run a competition constantly. So if you want to go over there and like hold it, please do. Please check it out. I might win some brownie points, but I did my thesis on the creation of the museum where I worked under Shirley Leckie. I don't know how long Shirley's been gone, but I'm still in touch with her. I wrote her a note as I was finishing and just said thank you because she made that happen. But I didn't want to do that after. I really wanted to do a monograph. I wanted to do, it's my only university press book, probably my first and only, I'm sure. But I was there running public programs, doing the kind of stuff that you do, that you teach your students or y'all do, but I was doing it on a really big scale, helping my friends and colleagues do their work better. I have literally spent my life in this world. And then 2016, I left that job and started my own company, the Lyndhurst Group. Just a quick note that there is no group, it's me, but nobody needs to know that. So when you're first starting out, a little bit of fudging, and I do have a group. I mean, it's a lot of my people's, but Ava's in my group and Dr. French is in my group. Nobody needs to know I'm not paying them, right? So I started a company really to work on, I was getting calls to do strategy and planning and stuff. That's my professional mojo. But I want to do this as much as possible. So, I mean, just to let you guys know, it literally started off, I was a dumb college student who I didn't barely graduate. I mean, I had 3.0, but I got my degree in liberal studies. And that meant, I think it was Coburn Hall. I went to meet the dude and I went there and I was like, hey, I'm about to start now at that point, I guess it was my second senior year in college. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And he literally looked at everything. And he said, well, we created this program just for you. It's basically an interdisciplinary program. We're going to put you in these slots. So then I did that and I got thrown into the world. I knew I didn't want to be a classroom teacher because honestly, I felt that they were way underpaid, overworked, and tethered to that job. And I like the flexibility of middle management, I guess is the best way to say it. I like the flexibility of moving around. So that's, and I didn't know, I'm going to be honest, I didn't know my ass from a hole in the ground when I started graduate school here. I can at least tell the difference now after graduating. Thank you guys for teaching me that. But I think the bigger story is, I had this discussion with somebody from the humanities department today, or we were talking about humanities. My life has been enriched by the pursuit of the humanities. And it's not because I have sat there and said okay, I need a job that makes X amount of dollars to give me this amount of blah, blah, blah. It's more, things have kind of worked out. I'm not going to deny the fact that my gender or my race or my socioeconomic status hasn't helped tremendously there. It has. There's no doubt. But here I am 51. And I accomplished a lifelong goal that I tried on. I have a roof over my head, my children are fed, and they have cars that, can get them places. I've made a life in this field. And the skills that I learned in these classrooms I use them regularly in business context. I ran multi-million-dollar businesses. I wrote funding proposals that are directly tied to my ability to make a case or make an argument based on data, right? All of these things come from these types of discussions in classrooms. It didn't happen by accident, and I worked hard at it. And I spent 10 years in graduate school because I did all of this stuff part-time, because I wanted to raise my kids and be around there for that. And I knew that the payoff wasn't the payoff is the ring. This is all just for me. And if I could wipe myself away from any other expectation from it, then I could find a path within that. So how's that?
That sounds
All
great.
right.
So that gets us started and leads into this book project. And tell me that the connection between your PhD studies and this book.
So in I don't know the date, in 1998 or 99, I wrote down a list of 10 goals. I still have the piece of paper. I accomplished all of them, believe it or not. They were everything from learn to play slide guitar, which is put a bottle on your finger and play if you don't know a slide. That's pretty much what Duane and that whole family, my music guys are all nodding there. They know what I'm talking about. Learn to surf, which I actually didn't do, but I did stand up on a surfboard, so I'll count that. And then, I wanted to get a PhD and write a book on the Allman brothers. Those were separate things, by the way, at that point, 98, 99. So when I wrote the goal down, I still was barely in my master's program, and there was no chance. I could barely pull this off when I did. I doubt I could do it again, to be honest with you. But when I sat down with my advisor, Van West, so, again, if you're going into grad school, your advisor, everybody will tell you, is an important person there, because that is the person that's going to allow you to go the direction you want to, but shape it to make it some type of scholarship that they will sign off on. You can't have an advisor who doesn't give you any time at all. It happens a lot. And if you're running into that, my suggestion is get the hell off that train as soon as you can and find something else, because you're never going to fix that dynamic. Van West is the Tennessee State historian. He has run the Center for Historic Preservation at Middle Tennessee State University for years. He is an absolute giant in public history and in Tennessee in particular. Like Shirley Leckie before him at this department, he is the one who was getting people through with their dissertations to get the degrees. A lot of us fall off before we complete that dissertation or that thesis, because that's where the rubber meets the road. That's the hardest part, is you're all on your own. And God dang, it feels lonely and it's scary. So I already had a sense of what I was doing. So my thesis was on museums and community. Really, really, really proud of my first chapter, which is on the American Museum movement. I always thought I was going to write a book on it. Never did. Really proud of it. Go look at it. I'll put my crap up against most people's on that. But it was the idea that American museums were founded with an ideal of community service, which is separate from European museums, which are about showing off either a rich collection or a locale or a government's collection. So I sat down with Van with my thesis. And he has us sitting sideways, which was always weird to me because you're looking, but we're meeting and I hand it to him and he's like thumbing through somewhat disinterestedly. And I said, what I really want to do is I want to do a book on the Allman brothers. And it was the funniest thing is he goes, and it was just like the look on his face, like, yeah, I want to, can this guy do this kind of thing? And it was really like, it was the moment. So I went into it telling him I wanted to write a book on the Allman brothers. Now, what Van did, and I don't know if he does this with younger students, but I've been around, I published this or that way. I was on my own pretty much. And that's fine. I was okay with that. I basically wrote a dissertation, and you mentioned yours being 700 pages, so you can relate. I basically put everything down that I could and tried to make it into something. I was really proud of it. Oh, I was so proud of it. I thought it was going to be, okay, I don't know about you. When I write something that big, it's 80% done 100% of the time. My first draft of something serious is almost 80% done, 100, almost always. Maybe 2 or 3 times in my life, that's not been the case. One of them was actually chapter 2 of my dissertation, where I had my fight or flight moment. I almost quit. I'm like, damn it, I can't do this. It was my first draft that I read was so bad. And then the second one, though, was the dissertation. It was maybe 60% done, maybe closer to 40. So what I had to do was completely change a manuscript that was basically a whole bunch of thoughts all sort of jumbled into one, thinking when I came out with my PhD it was going to be a lot better because that's what the advisors do, right? No, there's the only perfect dissertation is a finished dissertation. Only perfect thesis is a finished thesis. Get that in your mind now. If your professors don't agree, I already saw Dr. Lesser nod on that one. So if your professor, she already agrees. If your professors don't believe in that theory, find somebody else because just get the damn thing done. And then because it's a different format than this next thing. So the book was always my goal. And bottom line, Spencer Downing, who was on faculty here until whenever that was, God bless him, he read my dissertation, all 500 pages. And he called me up and says, you just wrote a book on at Fillmore East. And I was like, what? Well, first of all, I was embarrassed that my dissertation was not that, because my God, my peer had just read something and it's terrible. Are we good? Okay. And then the second was, how the hell do I do this now? How do I take this thing down to do that? And that was that whole process. Okay, now I have my motif, I have my thesis. And by the way, I thought my argument had to be something a little more groundbreaking than, if you want to understand Duane Allman's vision, listen to this record. That's the only argument really that is in this thing. Now, I find a lot of ways to say that, I think. But that mystery of what a historical argument is in a book was not apparent to me until like this phase. Like I just was expecting to be more, just like I used to think primary sources was literally you had to go read the actual Magna Carta, you had to hold or see a paper document in front of you. When no, you can read the Magna Carta online, it's there, you know. So I had to learn completely all of that. And this whole process was part of that, sure. But in this case, it was a matter of I had the draft that I was sure was done. 2 months, I'll put this thing together, wrap it up, and send. Oh no, it was a year, and I had to kill my babies. Awesome.
That phrase, by the way, I don't know if you hear that, but you have to edit out the parts you love. You've written something, labored over it, and an editor tells you this is too long. You're going to have to choose what to keep and what to get rid of. So
I mean, you killed, like I killed, and I think it comes from either Jack Kerouac or the Beats, but kill your darlings. And, I eventually started taking phrases out and putting them somewhere else because I didn't want to lose them, period. I'm sure, I don't know, you do that, and Dr. Lesher, I don't know if any of y'all do, but like the written word is so precious to me that if I get something I really like and it just doesn't quite fit there, I started. And what screws with me is I started a whole social media campaign along this. That's where all that crap should have gone. Like I didn't save it for that. I'm going to have to go back through all these. Yeah. My folder is final. Who else has those in their stuff, right?
Final two. Oh my God.
Clearly, we've all got the same damn system.
Final, all caps. Yeah, that's really, really final.
As an editor, it's always fun to see someone send me their first draft with final on it.
Yeah, and you're like,
See about that. So the dissertation is done, and you want to transform this into a book. Are you working with UF Press? Did you shop it around to different presses?
Okay, that's a really good question. I did not shop it around. I could have. I probably should have, in hindsight, maybe tried even for a New York publishing house, like more of a trade press rather than academic press. I chose UF Press. So here's my process. I cheated a little bit because I do have some inside track. I went to Van West, my advisor, and this was a put up or shut up time for him, because if he didn't like my work, he wasn't going to make any recommend. He would have found a way not to recommend this. He knew someone at the press. Mary, and they were falling, Mary Puckett, and they were falling. I'm not going to say they fell all over themselves for it. It took me a little bit they have a proposal form, and I'm good with that. Like, I'm really good. If you give me some questions to answer on those, like, that's why I'm good with grant proposals and stuff. So, because I'm not starting with a truly blank page. So they gave me some construct to work with, and it took me some time. Like, my first offer to her was, "There's my dissertation. What do you think?" And then I had to reframe it to this. And then here's how this works, y'all, at a university press. They just signed the contract and said, here's your deadlines. Now I am a fiend about my deadlines. Deadlines and goals. You know, when you put that stuff down, that's how that's how I keep track of myself. That's, you know, so I hit every deadline I set. Or I asked them for an extension and hit that deadline. I'm actually in that with something that I was supposed to do 2 weeks ago on monuments and memorials. And I was like, I need some more time to percolate, you know? So I gave them a proposal by a certain date. They accept that proposal. Sometimes with some changes, but they didn't have a lot really at that point. I think they expected a pretty finished manuscript from me. Then I took that hardbound dissertation. Talk about kill your darlings. I sat with a pencil and I went through and I marked and I basically blocked out things that were not going to make it. So I went from 144,000 words to 85 in that book right there, And then, so I blocked out whole sections I didn't want to do. You know, there's a lot of context and backstory that you can skip in a book versus a dissertation, or you don't really know what you want to keep until you get there. That was part one. And then then it was just sort of piecing it together. And then it was like going through, it really all came together in this February of 2021. I went down to Macon. Place is very important to me. I've mentioned this to you before. And I finished the first draft. And then I gave it to a friend of mine, Sue, who edited it for me. I paid her with my relief money from the feds. I was like, I'm putting it back in the humanities economy, damn it. We're gonna, you know, and so she did a wonderful job, like helping me tease out some larger stories, cut back on some stuff and blah, blah, blah. And very validating to me to have a fellow historian read my draft. And she wrote me at one point, she goes, well, I just told Danielle, her partner, she said, so I just told Danielle, well, we gotta be Allman Brothers fans now. Bob just convinced me. And that wasn't my goal. My goal was just to tell an interesting story. Like Sebastian said, he digs them too. So I'm like, all right, I did my job. Maybe Ava will read it and understand what her dad loves so much about this stuff.
Yeah. So you edit the book down to the length that they wanted.
Yep.
And it goes into production, and suddenly now you're marketing the book. I'm curious about who's going to read this book. I mean, you mentioned it's about this particular album, Fillmore East, at Fillmore East, right? This is 1971.
71.
And Duane Allman, this is when you read the introduction, you realize this is pretty stunning that the album goes gold and then he dies
4 days later.
4 days later in a motorcycle accident. And
I mean, about the most rock and roll story you can get, right? Like you're struggling, you're doing this, you're almost famous, like the title of the movie that Cameron Crowe made, which is somewhat from his time with the Allman Brothers. And damn it, it's all gone.
Right.
But you flame out like on a motorcycle on the side of the road. Like that's the ultimate story, right?
And so to tell this story, you said, I'm interested in place and space. Place is important. It's a journey, Duane Allman's journey to Fillmore East. So can you tell me a little bit about that approach to using place and those places that are important to the story that you tell here? That
comes directly, inadvertently and yet directly out of my public history experience. I cut my teeth at the History Center in downtown on this work. So the very concept of understanding Central Florida as a place, versus the History Center as a location or UCF as a location, but what are the things and calibers and qualities that make a place or a community or those things? Like, what are the things we can, what are the through lines or the threads? For the Allman Brothers story, that place, more than anything, is the South. And so it's everything from it's where they're from, it's where their music, all of the musical form. In fact, all of American popular music comes from the American South. I mean, almost all of it is Southern in nature. Jazz is invented in the American South and in New Orleans, that they play, they follow the jazz impulse. They're not jazz musicians. For this story, up until 1971, when the Allman Brothers break through, if you are a Southern musician, you have to go to one of several places to make it. Nashville being one if you're of the country genre. Otherwise, it's New York, Chicago, LA, mostly New York and LA. You go there as a solo artist, they put a band behind you, you record records and you put it out. That was the option. Duane had exhausted these three options by the time he formed the Allman Brothers Band. He'd gone to Nashville, didn't make it, gone to New York. Actually, before that, he went to New York, didn't make it. Then he does LA, doesn't make it. Part of this LA journey involves them coming back south and recording some sessions at Muscle Shoals. And the band realizes, oh my God, this is what we always want to sound like. And so when the record company says hell no, Duane says F you and moves back south. The South is it. And then the places or place. This story happens in small towns, not even really the suburbs, because you're not talking about urban centers of the South. And even the urban centers of the South are nothing like they are today. I mean, Miami, to a certain extent, maybe to a certain extent, Orlando's not for sure. But we're not talking about New York, Chicago level urban centers. This is small town. A lot of these things are affiliated with either military bases or some other federal infrastructure or investment within the American South. The songs are Southern in origin, the themes are, but they break out mostly in like New York, Boston, and that Northeastern corridor. It's still to this day, one of the most popular bands up along there. So they have this weird Southern thing, but the Northerners loved them because they were just good. You know, they played ballsy rock and roll that people liked. And so for me with Place's vibe is really important to me. And I think it goes all the way back to the fact that my dad grew up on a chicken farm in Babson Park, Florida, off of Beatty Road, which was named for my family. And so to me, there's something about that farm, the thing, my dad we'd always go back there and go fishing. It's long been sold from the family, but I think Place has a different thing. And you put me in museums that look at local history, and I'm always thinking about, or regularly, what is a place's impact? So when I went to finish the book, I'm such a nerd, y'all. This is no shit. I went to Macon to really finish the first draft. You know, I was down there with my dog and we like walked around and did all this. And I wasn't imagining I was past the imagining part at that point. I was just sort of being there, you know, and there's a lot of stories in Macon that are not in the book that I know about. Then I actually finished it. This is an inadvertent nerd story. I was in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, where this story begins, that Duane's whole story takes off there. I actually went to Muscle Shoals to just finish up my final draft. And this is the nerdier part. I was actually writing it in Muscle Shoals on the 50th anniversary of Duane Allman's death, which is not intentional, but if it could have been intentional, I would have made it so, because that's the kind of dork I am. So I'm like sitting there in Muscle Shoals when he did it. I mean, in this little tiny, has anybody ever been there? Like, okay, we got one person. I mean, it's not easy to get to Muscle Shoals. Like, you have to want to get there. You have to be there. There's not a whole heck of a lot going on. I'm like sitting there, and all of a sudden I'm like getting to this point where I wrote about his death. And all of a sudden I'm like, I just had chills. I was like, holy crap. I'm like on the precipice of this in a place where this story, I wasn't in Macon. I spent a lot of time traipsing around New York City. The Fillmore East building is gone. I mean, what a shame. Because New York has a good historic preservation aesthetic too, but the building's gone. It's the only thing that's left is the facade and the lobby. But I like to, all the way back to your story, I like how place impacts all of this. I like to look at it that way. I think I wasn't taught that here, to be honest with you. I don't think place ever mentioned anything when I was in graduate school. It's something I picked up myself being around with public historians. And I mean, David Blight might be one of the first people to say it at a conference. He said, place is at the heart of how we see the past. And that's a great line, by the way, because, you know, I think trying to remove place from all of this discipline, I mean, takes a vital piece of the understanding out of it, to me, at least some understanding of what is going on around. It's, for this story, it's the American South, it's the racism issues, it's the issues with any type of change. Long-haired hippies traveling around with a black guy, playing black music, wearing funky clothes. It's not an intentionally political act, but it's a pretty subversive act in the 1960s and 70s in the South.
So let me ask you about pop culture as a as being treated in a kind of academic way, or at least taken seriously.
Taken seriously, right?
Let's say in an academic way.
Yeah.
You're writing this for a public audience.
But yeah, you asked about audience before too. All right, number one, I have an issue with our discipline and sort of trying to segment these things away. Though I recognize an historian of ancient Greece or ancient Rome would call us journalists anyway, right? So I'm already accepting the fact that American history, recorded American history, is journalism to much of our field anyway. So to me, pop culture has always been a fascinating study of people, place, and things, of change over time. And of snapshots of places in time and places. So to me, I don't see them removed, with the exception of if you're going hardcore with the ancient history versus what we do, right? I think pop culture is a vital lens through which to look at the past. This book, my goal was to really, this is a selfish book, okay? So when you read it, like, this is Bob's desire to make sense of a story that really flummoxed me. It didn't flummox me. It just blew me away when I heard the music. And then I started learning the story. I was like, geez, death, integration, success, notwithstanding the fact that it was music that everything I listened to, I found in that music, like, with the exception of punk rock. And I find it has a very punk rock kind of attitude to the approach, a very DIY approach. University Press of Florida has done a number of books that fit in this realm over the years. I've always liked their books. It's a reason I chose them as a press. Disappointed they didn't go with the hardcover, because I actually liked their hardcover books and I wanted a slipcase, but okay, whatever. But so you're asking about like the story. So I literally do tell a history, and I tell a history with a specific lens, which is, it's a biography of music. It is a biography of a sound. It is not a biography of a band, because that exists, a biography of a person, Duane Allman, because that exists. So that freed me up, to be honest with you, to play around with the form a little more, maybe than I would have in a traditional, and had I been younger and a little more worried about how I came across. At this stage, honestly, I'm going to get a bad review and it's going to crush my soul. And I'm going to feel terrible about it for at least a week. And every time I think about it after then, just like some embarrassing things I said in grad school on this campus, I'm still thinking about as I'm wandering around. So that shit never goes away, y'all. I'm just telling you right now. But, my idea was, I was saying this to Sebastian today, and, Ava, so I keep calling out Ava because she's my goddaughter and my niece, and thank you for coming. It means a lot to me. But I hope that someone like her will read that to not only just learn a little bit more about Uncle Bob a little bit, but also I did my best to write something that was a little more interesting than just for the people who liked the band. The hardcores were going to buy this thing. We all do. I have multiple copies I don't have multiple copies of a lot of these books, but I've read them all multiple times. I don't know if y'all read these, Alan Paul. So Alan signed on this, but before that was a guy named Scott Freeman who wrote a book in the 90s that the band hated, but I have read so many times it's like falling apart,
Willie Burton.
So what's that?
Willie Burton.
Oh, I've read all of Willie's books. Willie's books don't have a lot to say to me. But yeah, so you're aware of these things. So what's that?
And there's Greg Allman.
Yeah, Greg's is good, and then Galadriel's is probably my favorite of all of them. So
That is-
Dwayne's daughter wrote a book. But so I had to figure out, like, not duplicating this.
Yeah.
I want to tell a story. But in all honesty, I think you have to be somewhat interested in either music, Southern music, or Southern culture. I think that's going to hit the most for that, Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to have to leave in a minute, but I want to ask this question. So our students are probably wondering how you work, and I don't know that you worked with this collection in particular, but they should be aware of it. Can you say a little bit about the Center for Music in Middle Tennessee?
So thank you. And let me zoom out and talk just a bit more about, they didn't have a lot of Allman Brothers. I'm actually speaking there next month, and Greg Reish was on my, actually, he was not on my committee, but I took, Greg and I go back. So what Dr. Lester's asking about is a collection called the Center for Popular Music at MTSU. So let's get in general just with sources, because I think that's the point that Dr. Lester's talking about. And I'll say it's overwhelming to approach any project and think about the amount of sources to get and how you're going to get them. I think any historian would tell you that unless you find a trove at the place where you are and you can work. There's just a lot of angles you can go. I am not one who discovered the joy of just dropping into a special collections or archive and saying, what do you got on blah? Part of the reason was because of time. I spent 2 days or a full day at an archive at Michigan, University of Michigan, looking through the John Sinclair papers. Very quickly, John Sinclair was arrested for 2 joints sometime in the 60s and was sent to for 10 years in prison for 2 joints of marijuana, or maybe it was 5. Anyway, it was a small amount. And he was part of, he was the leader of the, manager of the MC5, Motor City 5, one of the first punk bands in history. So I went thinking, well, there's going to be a treasure trove. And there was, but it had nothing to do with my subject. So I spent a full day there, snapping pictures till my phone died, stuff I've never used since. So that's where the archives, it's kind of like, I was like, I'm here early, can I see them? And I did a lot of that on my business trips, like I could do that. Where I found the most was in the digitization of the student newspapers from the 60s, the NEH, the National Endowment for Humanities. God bless that beloved organization of the federal government that needs more money and that I believe in wholeheartedly. So student newspapers were all digitized and they were text searchable. So honestly, if you look up the word Allman, is not a very common word in the 60s. It always comes up with the Allman Brothers Band, and then Penn State had somebody named Allman. So I would get some football shit sometimes, but all to say, find the archives, talk to the archivists, talk to the librarians when you have time. I think now it's probably easier to email them, ask what they have before you go. I did not thank them in my acknowledgments like I should have, the archivists and things, but they will find stuff for you. And especially as you're building your knowledge base and you're putting your stuff into Zotero or whatever else you use, you're not going to know the themes you're looking for really as you're beginning. That comes much more later. So you sort of want to err on the side of you just want inclusion. So don't be afraid of the archives. Ask them ahead of time for what they have that might relate to your subject, and be open to other things. I would look at these newspapers, sometimes full newspapers, and I'd see ads that just inspired me to think about the time period a little bit differently. You know, when you're just looking at a newspaper. I'm talking to 2 historians. I'm seeing them nod because you guys know this too. That is never a waste of time, just like a humanities degree is never a waste of time, in my opinion. You know, that work leads to others and leads to others. So I didn't use it as much, although the Allman Brothers story was really not well pulled together. Even at the museum, they don't even know what they have in Macon. I've spent time with their archive, and fortunately I did before they squirreled it away, but you know, there's just angle upon angle upon angle you can do this, and talk to those archivists. Have you done work up there, by the way? Or are you just aware of it? The CPM?
I was associate editor on the Tennessee Encyclopedia Project.
Oh my God. So we should talk. Okay. So your name does go. What am I saying all this for? You should be up here talking. So by the way, digital encyclopedia, you guys went. So we used y'all along with Matthew Gibson, believe it or not. The Virginia Encyclopedia Virginia. We had Tennessee, Georgia had one. I had a whole grant funded project to do digital encyclopedia best practices that Matthew, my name's listed on the masthead on the thing, but I more said, okay, you know, I didn't do a lot of the written content, but I did a lot of the prep. Then we were, Tennessee Encyclopedia was a part of that.
For sure. I want to make sure that you get a chance to ask a couple of questions. Do you have questions for Dr. Beatty?
Or Dr. Beatty.
Or Dr. Beatty, I'm sorry. I confused
Okay.
Warren Beatty.
Yeah, everybody has that.
Yeah.
I was once in the education building in an English class, and my teacher talked about the Warren used to call himself Beatty. He said he went to high school with him.
Yeah.
So I've always held on to that.
Oh, great.
Bye. Good to see you. Thank you.
I do have a question, another question I didn't, and that is about, you mentioned this in your introduction, the line between historian and fan.
Mm.
You are a fan, clearly, and you don't try to hide that.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
so the first line is something like, listen, make no mistake about it, as you approach this book, you need to know one thing. I am an unabashed, hardcore fanboy of the Allman Brothers Band and of Duane Allman. And I did that, so I was telling Sebastian this, good to see you, sir, when we were talking, and I did that because I mean, I couldn't hide it. There was just no way. Like, you were going to read it, I might as well acknowledge it up front and just say, I know this. And here's the thing about historians and biases and everything else, right? We all have them. We all bring them to our work. Nothing is without that. I said it in my interview with Sebastian. The decision for somebody to write down an account of something is a subjective decision that this was important enough to write down, right? The decision for somebody to save it is also a decision, just like my decision to include it in a book or whatever else. So probably this is what makes this book so hard, was I am an academically trained historian. I care deeply about what we have done, our field, how we put it together and do. By the same token, I don't want to be constrained by that and try to somehow extricate myself from something that I really care a lot about. So I think, it was my attempt to go ahead and acknowledge those biases up front. And then, I also said in that same preface, like, look at my sources. Like, I don't tell you who my sources is throughout the text because it annoys me as a reader to constantly read. Scott French said to, Sebastian Garcia in the UCF blah, blah, blah on this date. Like, I don't need any of that to know Scott French said, get Bob on your show. We will see him on Thursday, right? Like, that's all the quote needs to be. Yeah. So winnowing all that crap out was another way to say, I'm a historian. I don't need to tell you this. I'll put a footnote there. You should find it if you're concerned about what I said. Right? The fanboy part was, I think that my one chance with this book to represent myself as fully as I felt comfortable doing with the world. Right. I love this group. I think they're great. I think you guys should all listen to them today, tomorrow, and the next day. I understand if you don't, because music is all about preference. It's what attunes to your ears, or in my case, ear. This year's doesn't work, but that's all I'm saying.
Well, I think we're at 5:30. So,
wow.
Thank you all for coming in. Thank you, Dr. Beatty.
Thank you. If you guys want, now listen, I do have books for sale, although I'm not holding anybody accountable for them because I know you're all poor college students. I know the department's going to get a copy of the book. I hope the library will eventually get a copy of the book. I'm here to answer questions. I mean, I'm
sure I'll assign it for you.
Yeah, I have. And if you already have a book, I see you have one and whatever, but I can sign a book. You can take that with you. You don't need that. Listen, I want to say to the students, thank you all for sticking it out. I appreciate it. I don't know if you got extra credit for this or you just came on your own. I was not the kind of student who attended this kind of stuff. I was a really bad student. But being at a university and having a chance to chime in and do these things, I hope takes a little of the mystery out of this whole thing for you. And just know everybody going through this stuff feels like, most of us feel like we're really dumb too. And so if you're ever feeling that, like, I don't belong in here or whatnot, I promise you, everybody in class has either had that thought within the last 5 or 10 minutes or has just recently stopped worrying about it. So it is a big ass mystery, y'all. There is no secret to it at all, really. Just be good at it, be authentic, be thoughtful. Yeah, appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was kind of going to give Ava a quick bug because I bet she wants to go back home to your parents. I like that. I hear the gavel. You're making a bunch of noise.
Wait, that. Are you going later?
On the recording.
Yeah.
I know. They shouldn't. Just recording.
Oh.